Hi, everyone. Welcome to End of Life Conversations and Reflections. Today, my guest is Nick Locke. Welcome, Nick. Nick grew up in London, England, and immigrated to Canada in 1974 at the age of 24. For the last 46 years, Nick has lived in many places all across Canada and currently resides in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Nick is a chartered accountant and began his career in the business financial field, and he moved into federal politics in 1981, where he spent 9 years. In 1990, Nick moved into the charitable sector, where he has been in senior executive fundraising roles for large charities, primarily in cancer care and research. Over the last several years, Nick has been a fundraising consultant, and I understand he's planning his retirement as we speak, and he's hoping to volunteer to help charities with their fundraising goals. Nick and I volunteer for an organization called Two Worlds Cancer Collaboration Foundation, and Nick provides us with a lot of support behind the scenes to make sure we meet our goals. So thank you so much for connecting with me today and having this chat about death and dying.
My pleasure, Sarah. It's always great to see you, and it's a lovely opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I just love having these conversations because they're all so unique to every single person, obviously. So I would like to start by asking you, when you were growing up, like, was there a death or dying experience that you could relate to, or what was your understanding at that time about death and dying?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure that I really understood death and dying back then,
Yeah.
and or do any of us anyway. But I was born in 1949, as you said, in London. So literally within 5 years of World War II. And my dad was in the armed forces. He landed in Normandy on D-Day 2, and fought the whole last year of the war in Europe. Ended up in Berlin. My mum was living throughout the whole war. She was born and lived in London, and so went through the whole Blitz. And she was actually during that time she volunteered with the what was called the Women's Royal Air Force, and was on the top of buildings in London throughout the Blitz, looking for bombs and fires and explosions and whatever, reporting them, etc. So she really went through a lot of stress in that period of time. But the reality was, in my life post-war, my family was incredibly positive. And I have two brothers who were born 3.5 years ahead of me, so closer to the end of the war. But the focus of my parents and my family was not on the past and, of course, everything that went on through that period of time. But it was on the future, and it was their focus was on me and my brothers as well, and building our lives for us. And so they invested so much in our lives, despite all that they had been through. And many examples of that. They got us all involved, or my dad really focused and got us involved in sports, primarily soccer, football as we call it over there, and which we played for many, many, many years and made many friends through that. Our education as well. We were very close to their family, so my grandparents and my uncles and aunties and cousins. We had a very, very strong, close relationship with them. We were a very, very close family. And so that life was, I found, and finally my dad was the one who got me into my career. He was in book publishing. He worked for a book publishing firm in the city of London, very close to St. Paul's Cathedral. And I actually used to go every summer and work for him in his office. And that's where I got into accounting. And then eventually my dad got me a job with a major accounting firm in the city of London. And so he launched my career for me as well. There's no question around that. So everything that I remember from growing up was extremely positive, and laid the the foundation for my life going forward. And so I don't have, we didn't focus on death and dying particularly, and that as a subject was not high on my list. I think we had a very, very positive growing up, and I think I inherited that really for most of my life. But it is an issue now that's top of mind. It is, one of the reasons why I'm really happy to be chatting and talking with you about this, because people don't tend to talk about it, especially men. And so, but it is now for a couple of reasons. Number one, my mum passed away, as you know, last year at just shy of 103. And that was a massive loss for me. And so that really raised the flag around the issue of death and dying. And also I hit the big number of 70 last November as well. And that's, I found to be a very scary number compared to 65, 60, 55, etc. So it really started to come home. Over the last year or so, it's really started to come home for me. And I am thinking about it much more.
Right. But does everyone in your family live that long? Like, is that just a part of your genes? Because your mom lived to like 103, you said, right?
Yeah, she was 3 weeks shy of 103. Yeah.
And so,
My dad was 94 when he passed away. I can't. My mum's parents were in their 80s. My dad's parents, I think, were a little younger when they passed away, probably in their 70s. It's my mum was the final sibling or final child in her family that passed away, but at 103, that's not surprising. So yeah, I guess we have fairly good genes.
Yeah, you do, and so you I think you're gonna live to be, a lot older than maybe most people would get to. So, but it's still really good to plan ahead, obviously.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so tell me about your mom, like what happened? What was that experience like? Was she ill?
That's a really no, she wasn't. Now, I mean, throughout her life, she had in her early 80s, she was diagnosed with oral cancer.
Oh.
However, it was caught early, removed by a surgeon, and didn't come back or spread to any other organs in her body. She had both her knees replaced again during her 80s, but she was still fairly active, even even over 100. She was still able to walk around. She lived on her own until the last 6 months of her life.
Yeah.
And at that time, we moved her in with my eldest brother. And so she lived with them for 6 months, and then she slowly sort of drifted away and became less active. The last 2 weeks, I think she spent her whole time in bed, but she didn't have any major diseases or anything like that. There was some dementia kicking in, but it wasn't as serious, I think, as some people have experienced.
Yeah.
And so, I was able to, in the last 5 years of my mum's life, go over it because I was in consulting then, didn't have a full-time job. I was able to go over every year to spend a month and a half to, in one case, 3 months with her, 5 years in a row, and just living with her at home and, making her breakfast, lunch, dinner, and playing music with her, taking her out to the pub once a week.
Or fish and chips.
For fish and chips every Friday. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, it was, so mum had a very, very independent, after my dad passed away, which was in 2004, she lived 15 years on her own in the same house, but was very, very independent and very much against, there was the question was raised, well, maybe we should look at you going into a care home. No, I want to stay home and be on my, my own house and whatever. And she had extremely good support from my brothers and also my nephews and nieces as well. they regularly went to visit with her, and one of my nephews even used to go over and stay with her 4 nights of the week. And
That's so lovely that your
yeah,
family all contributed to her being able to stay home at the age of 100 and
yes,
plus. Yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
it was something that it was.
Sorry, the sound's gone off, Nick. I don't know what happened.
Can you
Oh,
hear me now?
yeah.
Okay, sorry. We were all very close to her. I was particularly close to her
Yeah.
because despite the fact that I moved to Canada when I was in 1974, when I was 24, we were extremely close. And in fact, when I got married and my son was born in 1978, my mum arrived in Canada the day after he was born. She was planning to be there when he was born, but he came a little bit early, so she missed it by a day. But she came back to Canada and attended every single one of his first 14 birthdays.
Wow.
So, despite that we had that geographical distance, she was regularly over there, as was my dad used to as well. So
Yeah.
he would come over. And also my son and daughter used to visit the UK with my parents as well. So,
Yeah.
despite that geographical distance, there was this very, very close relationship between us. Yeah.
That's amazing. I think the connection with family and the support probably made it possible, obviously, in this scenario. And I wish a lot of families were that connected. It's not the reality for a lot of people. But when everyone pitches in and supports their family, it sounds like it is possible to stay home, because the idea of going to nursing homes, especially now, learning about the conditions with COVID-19,
Right.
is scary,
Right.
and I think about my own mortality, and I think about if I were to live that long. I actually don't have kids, so I'm like, no one's gonna take care of me. So I may end up there, and it's a really scary thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about your mom that you had mentioned she wrote a book? And you tell
She
me a little
did.
bit about that? Yeah.
Yeah. I went back for both my dad's funeral and my mum's funeral, and I have to say they were both um, they weren't sad events at all. They were celebratory events, no question about that. And my mum was a good writer. She did extremely well at English um, writing at school. She had um, great scores from that. I think we ran into, looking through her stuff after she passed away, we ran into a certificate that she got from her school, which placed her #1 in terms of her English literature writing. But she actually did write a book, and here it is.
Oh, wow. Gorgeous.
And
Wow.
so
1916 to 1947.
that's right, yeah. So she was born in 1916, and 1947 was just after the war and just after my brothers were born. And so obviously with 3 young boys, it took her away from writing. She had other things on her on her
No
as
kidding.
it were. And so but she did write this, hand wrote this, and then we put it onto a computer, and
Yeah.
then my one of my nephews, he took that and worked with a publisher to turn it into a book. And he searched the internet and came up with a whole bunch of images based upon her stories that he included in the book as well. But it talks about her life between 1916 to 1947.
Wow.
And the theme is born with a plastic spoon in my mouth,
Hmm.
because things were difficult back in those days.
Yeah.
But she survived it, and she also had an incredible sense of humor, and that shows in the book as well. So
Amazing.
we had a lot of copies of the book printed out, and we handed them out to everybody who attended her funeral, and also shared it with some other sort of friends and family who weren't able to be there, and got tremendous feedback from it. So it was more of her funeral was definitely a celebration, and we after the funeral we even went to the local pub, the Golf Hotel it was called,
Mm-hmm.
and celebrated, which she would have, been very, very proud of, because she enjoyed going there as well whenever she could
That's
for lunch with us. So,
amazing. That's
yeah,
just absolutely amazing. And that brings me back to, we talk a lot about legacy work and leaving something behind for your family. Like that's something priceless that you will pass on for generations. And I often wonder why people don't think about maybe not writing a book. Not everyone can write a book, like is talented enough to do that, but leaving a bit of a memory or a legacy behind for their loved ones so that they can live on through their loved ones. And I think that's partly doesn't happen because we don't talk about death and dying and people don't
mm,
want to go there. So it sounds like your mom, wrote that not thinking that after she dies, maybe that this is going to pass on. But it's a really great example of the meaning it can provide to your children and their children moving forward. So I think part of this conversation hopefully will help people kind of think about things like that, and that's my hope. And
it is
so that,
very, very
yeah, absolutely. So on that note, like, were there any religious or spiritual things around funeral or grief or death with your mom, or was it a very traditional kind of service, or was there something special or different about it? I mean, obviously it was special, but with going to the pub and all that. But some cultures have um, certain rituals. Like in ours, we have to wait, like we pray for 40 days straight for the soul to reach its destination, for example. Is
okay.
there any beliefs like that in your
I,
family?
Religion was not a big issue in our family. Not like it didn't play a role, but it wasn't ingrained, I think, in our family growing up. I mean, I sang in the local choir, but mainly because it was a source of income for me.
Oh, really?
Hate
You
to say
got paid
that.
for it?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Now,
Oh
when
my
I was
God,
this is
Nick, I
when I was
didn't know
younger,
that.
um, and at high school, I remember we had daily religious services and RE classes as well. Um, I don't know whether schools do that now, but I grew up with that. But religion was not a big central part of my family. Um, and when I say it wasn't, I mean, it was within the culture, but it wasn't within our family strongly. Having said that, when my dad retired at 75, and they moved to Ipswich to be close to my brothers, he did actually go to church every week, and something that he didn't do when we were younger. And then also in my mum's final 5 years, um, she had a representative from the church visit with her, usually once every 2 weeks, to sit with her, to read for her, to talk about. Uh, I'm not sure. I didn't sit in on the
Yeah,
sessions, but I mean, I did meet them a couple of times when I was over there. But she really appreciated them coming, and so there was an element of that, and I think that support was important to her in her last 5 years of her life, in addition to the family. But I would say that the funerals for both mum and dad were more of celebrations around their lives, than very sort of religious based
right.
events. Yeah.
And are there any other deaths or losses that come to mind when you think about death and dying?
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously the number one, of course, is my mum. No question
Yeah.
about that. It, it I've thought about this a lot. My When my dad passed away, naturally it was it was sad. It wasn't a surprise because he actually did have cancer.
Okay.
And so, but when my dad passed away, my mum was still there. And I always looked at my parents as a team.
Right.
Um, you know, my dad would take me to soccer and got me going with that, but my mum would be the one who would have to wash my kid every week. So,
Yeah.
they kind of work together in a kind of, in a different way. But they were a team. And so, it's losing my mum was much a bigger loss for me than losing my dad, because nobody in the team was around anymore. And
Yeah.
so certainly losing her is what has triggered my thoughts around death and dying now. Thoughts that I just didn't even give any thought to, and issues that I didn't give any thought to when my father passed away, because I still had my mum there.
Right.
And she, she represented both my mum and dad.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 So I mean, and her life to me is definitely a legacy.
Yeah.
There's no question about that, and I've given that a huge amount of thought, and
Yeah.
I've it's a value that I've definitely embraced myself, and I want to build into strongly into the rest of my life. Not that I haven't already in some ways, but
Yeah.
I perhaps haven't understood or appreciated it as much
Yeah.
as I do now.
Right. And so on that note, what hopes and or fears do you have? Like I'm going to put them both, clump them together. Um, maybe we should talk about, do you have any fears around your own death and dying?
Yeah, I do. I kind of, and I've been writing this down and thinking about it quite a bit over the last couple of years. Number one would be that it would be, long, painful, and lonely.
Yeah.
Um, and my choice would be for my life to end exactly the same way as my mum's did, with
Mhm.
at home with family and in a peaceful situation, and
Mhm.
painless, of course.
Mhm.
So that would be my first fear.
Yeah.
Is how am I gonna pass away? The second is more around making sure that my life is organized, and so that I don't leave a burden for my children, so that my finances are in order. Um, I have a will, and in fact, I just signed my will this Tuesday.
Wow,
Just
congratulations.
thank you. And I've been working on that for a couple of months, so but it's now done, which is good. And I'm also just about I've almost completed a fairly detailed letter to my son and my daughter, um, uh, explaining them my situation, what I want to happen, introducing the will to them, because they're going to be co-executors,
Yeah.
and split my inheritance 50-50.
Mhm.
So I want them to be aware and to know that things are in order. I don't want to leave them a burden,
Yeah.
and also beyond that, my third fear would be that I'm not truly leaving a legacy for my children, and I don't just mean from a financial point of view, but I
Mhm.
mean from a sort of an emotional and a meaningful life point of view as well. So I really want to spend a lot of time with my kids and my grandkids as much as I possibly can, to help them, support them, to be part of their lives in any way that I can,
Mhm.
so that we're it's going to add happiness to my life, but I would hope that it would also add value to their lives, and
Yeah.
going forward. So those are the three kind of main concerns that I have.
Yeah. A lot of people forget that legacy is the memories as well. The
Hmm.
memories that you spend with someone, those are priceless. So sometimes it's the intangible things. You know, people don't think, oh, spending time with my grandson is part of the legacy. But those memories that your grandson and your grandkids will have are with them forever. So I find those things are also priceless. So people don't give a lot of thought to. They're like, oh, I'll spend time when this happens or that happens. But thinking about, you know, people are like, oh, I can't leave this book, for example. I can't leave this huge legacy. But I feel like legacy can be simplified to the memories and the time you spend with your loved ones because those will stay with them forever and you can
Yeah.
never take those away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that you're absolutely right. I, you know, obviously the legacy of my mum and the time I've spent with her over the last 10 years is probably, you know, the highest on my list of memories. But
Yeah.
when I think back, I I do think back to times that I spent with my grandparents and with my uncles and aunties, etc. Even though it's many years ago, they today they still mean something to me, very, very much.
Absolutely. They become part of who you are and your fabric. And yeah, absolutely. It's so priceless. And I mean, as we see families living far apart and not being able to do
Yep.
that, or sometimes they live in the same city and don't spend time with each other. And I know you make a really concerned, like you make an effort to spend time with your grandkids and your family. So they're so lucky to have you, Nick. Um, what hopes do you have around your death and dying? So if you could orchestrate, like you already mentioned that actually, was there anything else that you would wish
I,
for your end of life experience?
yeah, I think the my hopes sort of align with the fears. Number one would be to remain as fit and as active as I can,
Yeah.
and so you know, I'm not going to be as active as my grandson, who was had his sixth birthday 2 days ago,
Wow.
and we bought him a basketball
Mm-hmm.
thing, and he's in and a tennis racket. We were out playing tennis the other day at 6 years old.
Wow.
I mean, he's so active. He's great at soccer. He's swimming. He's doing all of this stuff. So, but I can spend time, you know, with him.
Yeah.
So I want to remain as fit and active as I can. I really love to walk,
Yeah.
and that's something that I do a lot of, as much as I can. Not today because we've had a big storm just blow through, but
Yeah.
there is a beautiful park for just around the corner from where I live here in Dartmouth, and I
Yeah.
walk there every day if I can. And so, you know, I'm eating better and than perhaps I did 5 or 10 years ago. You know, more sort of focused on my health than I perhaps was then, which I think is important.
Right.
And so I signed
Yeah.
up for a gym, although
You
it's
did. Oh,
yeah,
congrats.
but it's although it's you know it's been closed for a couple of
Yeah.
months, but they're just opening. So being fit as and active as I can, I think is absolutely critical to you know
Yeah.
the meaning of life. And I want my end of life, as I mentioned earlier, to be organized. And so I am working on you know an end of life plan, starting with my will, and there'll be lots of other um, elements to that as well. I think it's really important that people sort of step back and say, you know, okay, what is going to be needed, and to 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 make sure that things are organized and smooth for your children
Yeah.
and after you pass away. And there is a lot of work to do in that area. I'm finding. I used to think it was just a will, but
Yeah.
it's more than that.
Yeah.
It's you know so I'm you know I'm working on that as well. And I think that number three is making sure that I'm around to invest as much time and effort as I can in my my son and daughter's lives and my grandchildren as well. Now that's the COVID-19 has made that quite difficult,
Of course. Yeah.
um, and so it is easing up a little here, and I am spending more time with them. But you know, I used to drive my son to soccer, you know, 3 or 4 days a week.
Wow.
But of course,
That's,
that's not, you know,
yeah.
I used to actually coach him when he was younger. and I
Oh,
was when we lived in Ottawa. And he's a soccer coach now himself. So, but I just love to a phone
oh,
call. Hey, Dad, can you pick me up and drive me here?
oh
I
my
said,
God,
"Yeah,
they're so lucky to have you.
jump in the car," and I just love doing it. So, so I want to do a lot more of that with my son and my grandkids as
Yeah,
well, as much as I can, and add that value to their lives.
yeah. That's amazing. You absolutely are doing that. Sounds like you've done that your entire life and now more so even. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was a good number of years my um, after my son went to university here, and I eventually moved out west to Vancouver. There was a long distance between us, but
Yeah.
certainly when we were close, living together in Ottawa, and now more recently, yes, I spend a lot of time focusing on that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. They're so lucky. Just one last question before we end. I think we're going to get cut off in a minute, even maybe.
Oh my God.
Uh, yeah. Um, what do you think happens after we die?
What do we hope that
What do you
happens?
hope? What do you hope happens after we
I have
die?
four things. Number one, that those close to me have meaningful and happy lives in the same way that I feel like I have.
Yeah.
Um, Secondly, that people understand that much of the responsibility for that rests with themselves,
Yeah.
and is under their control. And I think given everything that's going on in the world these days, um, it's sometimes easy for people not to embrace that as that concept. I think in the end, we're all responsible for our own lives, and I think we have to pursue that. From a political point of view, I hope that democracy continues. As Winston Churchill said, democracy is not perfect, but it's still the best system. And I hope it continues and provides people with the freedom and the opportunity to pursue happiness and meaningful lives going forward. And that the progress that the world has seen over the last 100 years, I think that people downplay it a lot, but there has been tremendous progress in terms of reducing poverty and diseases around the world. Not that poverty still doesn't exist, even in North America, even in the developed world, but that humans continue to work on that progress and to improve the environment and the lives of people, as many people as they can. So that would be my four hopes for the future.
Such thoughtful answers. Thank you so much for,
My
taking the
pleasure.
time to do this interview, and sharing your perspectives with us today. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it too, because in a large extent, it's really triggered me thinking about these issues, and I think it's critical that people do think about these issues and not just, push them off to the side of the desk.
Yeah, and I appreciate having a male perspective. Like you said, a lot of men don't think about this. Yeah. So thank you so much, Nick, and thank you for
Okay, Zara.
everything that you do for people that sometimes you're not at the forefront of the stuff that and support you provide to even to girls. And I really appreciate everything you do and who you are. And I hope that we can connect again soon.
I hope so too. Thank
Yeah.
you, Zara.